Today is July 26th, 2012. I'm interviewing William Begert at his office at Pratt & Whitney in East Hartford, Connecticut. This is part 3 of 3 parts. Bill's interview. Interviewer is Eileen Hurst from Central Connecticut State University. Bill, I think we left off, you had just retired as a 4-star general in 2004, and you were stationed in Hawaii at the time.
Yeah, Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii.
Why did you retire?
It was time. I had been a commissioned officer for 36 years. I was actually asked to stay on for another year, or given the opportunity to stay on for another year by the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. But I decided it was time. There was a guy ready to take the job. He was the right time in his career. And I thought I'd been 3 years in Hawaii as a commander of Pacific Air Forces. I had accomplished a lot of what I wanted to, had a lot of stuff in motion. I'm not sure that I would have made as big a difference in the 4th year. So for those reasons, we decided to go ahead and retire at that point. It turns out that I probably should have stayed that year from a financial standpoint, because a year later they passed legislation which greatly increased the pension that I would have received had I stayed another year. But for professional reasons, it was the right time for the Air Force, I thought, for me to go ahead and retire.
Do you recall your last day in service?
Well, I do. It was, we have a formal change of command ceremony in the morning where I turn over the reins of the command to the new commander, and they had a retirement ceremony, a part of that. So it was on the parade ground at Hickam Air Force Base, which is historic in its own right because of December 7th, 1941. Governor was there. Jim Neighbors is a good friend of mine, sang the national anthem. The troops looked great. It was a beautiful, although warm day in July in 2004, and it went very, very well. It was a great ceremony. My family was there to enjoy it, which was really special. And but it's interesting. Of course, you show up in the staff car being driven by a guy, and Chief of Staff of the Air Force is there. The Commander-in-Chief of Pacific Command is there to officiate at the ceremony, and we did all the ceremony and change of command and retirement and everything else. And the new commander now is in place, and he got in my former staff car and drove off, and of course the Chief of the Air Force had his car, and the Pacific Command commander had his car, and he drove off. And I looked around, and there was no car for me. And I told my wife, I think we're walking back to head for the airplane. But it was just, it was around the corner and delayed. They hadn't forgotten me completely. But when the transition happens, it happens pretty fast. You go from being on call and having the reins of command and all that means, and then you're not.
What was the adjustment like for you?
It was pretty easy. Actually, it was. I had advice before I retired on life after the Air Force, and one of the former Chief of Staff said, "You're not going to know how tired you are until after you retire. Take 6 months off. Don't take the first job offer. Take your time, decide what you want to do, where you want to live, but take 6 months off minimum."
Did you do that?
I did. And it ended up being about 7.5 months. I got a call, or my official retirement date was the 1st of August. I got a call on the 4th of August from Pratt & Whitney asking, they were interested in talking to me, and were I interested in talking to them? And I said, not really, not right now. I said, can I hold off for a few months? And they said, sure, just call when you're ready to talk. And it was about October. And I said, okay, you still interested in talking? And I had some other job offers and potentials and stuff, but I was really interested in staying in New England if I could. I hadn't lived in New England since high school. My mother in 2004 was 86 years old. My dad had passed away. My brother, in fact, passed away that fall of 2004. I really had a strong inclination to stay in New England if I could find a job that I would find useful and acceptable, etc. And so Pratt and I started talking, and we closed the deal, and I came to work the 1st of February 2005. So I basically took off from the 4th of July of 2004 till the 1st of February 2005. So I had a great, relaxing time. Spent every day with my wife. We had a summer cottage to go to in Maine, which was nice. Got a little chilly in November, and we moved into a temporary apartment until I came to work down here at Pratt & Whitney.
And what job did you take at Pratt & Whitney?
At the time, the job was Vice President of International and Domestic Programs. And after 2 or 3 years, I accepted additional responsibility of running the aftermarket portion of the Pratt & Whitney military business, which is a very different business than business development.
Was Pratt interested in you because of your military career and your experience with the Air Force?
I think so. I replaced a guy who I knew very well, who had been also a 4-star Air Force guy, and he came in here 4 or 5 years prior to me, and he was interested in retiring from Pratt & Whitney, and they liked the model of having a retired general officer here, 4-star, and so they kind of targeted me to do the job that he had been doing. And in fact, as I retired now from Pratt & Whitney, I'm going to be replaced by another guy who retired a year ago, who's a retired Air Force 4-star. So Pratt & Whitney likes the model of having somebody like that.
So this is now 2012, and you are retiring again?
I'll probably flunk this retirement too. Pratt has asked me to do some consulting with them, and I agreed to do that. I don't know how long I'll do that. I've set up a consulting business in Maine. We've rebuilt the summer cottage to be a year-round home, and we're building a house in Santa Barbara, and so I can do consulting from anywhere on the planet if I want to. So I'll do some consulting. I may get, if I get any board officers to sit on the board of directors or something, I may do that. I've got some pro bono boards I already sit on. Talking about writing a book potentially over the next year. I'm already helping some guys in D.C. on being a technical advisor to a book that just came out on Amazon last week, and it's coming out in hardback next week.
What's the book?
It's called Centerline. It's a fiction, but based on real life. It's a story of a C-130 crew who are flying wounded warriors home for Christmas, so they can spend Christmas with their family. And so the story is really about the air crew flying the C-130, the medevac crew and their experiences, and the wounded warriors themselves. And so there's flashbacks, and it's about what these military people go through and what their life is like. It's a very powerful book. It's very well written. It's written by a guy by the name of Dave McIntyre, who's a retired Army Special Forces guy. The genesis of the book was in the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Dave's son was a C-130 pilot, and he called home one night to talk to his dad and said, "Dad, I had a really interesting, exciting mission today. I landed in Baghdad in a sandstorm." And he said, "Son, why didn't you land in a sandstorm?" He says, "I had to. I had gravely wounded on board. The medevac crews couldn't even strap in because they were doing IVs and trying to keep these guys alive. And I really had no choice." He says, "But Dad, I landed on the center line of the runway, and it was a really good landing." And Dave thought to himself, this is a kid 4 years ago I was worried about giving the keys to the family car to, and he's doing things like this now. And so that was in his mind to write a book about these wounded warriors, the medevac crews, and the C-130 crews. So it's very good. Technically, it's very, very good as far as flying airplanes and what it's like and the interaction in the air crew. I've helped a few of the drafts, and Dave went through 10 draft copies of it now. It's a very well written book. So I'm helping now a little bit with the publicity as they roll out the book and try to do some book signings. And so that's an entirely different thing that I've never done. There's strong talk of making it either a weekly series or an HBO series, and they've asked me to be technical advisor for that, which I think would be really fun. They've got some great Hollywood connections, these guys, and producers who are interested in doing something. So I suspect I'll probably stay pretty busy in my retirement.
Did you stay in touch with any of your old friends from the Vietnam War?
Yes, there is something called the Forward Air Controller Association, FAC Association. It's got hundreds of guys in it. They have an annual reunion. I've only made one or two reunions, but I've kept in touch with a few of the guys that I was very close to.
Have you had time to join any veterans organizations?
Oh yes, I'm a member of Air Force Association. I'm a member of the Air Tanker Association, um, uh, as well as several other military affiliated associations. So yeah.
Are you active in any of those?
Yes, in fact, the Air Force Association National Convention in September, they've asked me to be a speaker, and I've agreed to do that. Airlift Tanker Association, they've asked me to take a high position in the association, and I may end up doing that too. It's a pro bono thing, but it's their convention is 4,000 to 5,000 people showing up for it. A lot of active duty guys, aircrew members, etc. So that's always fun for their annual convention. So. Yeah, I very much am in touch with my friends from the Air Force, both some on active duty that served with me, under me, as well as my peers and some of my previous bosses. It's a pretty small population of folks, and we stay in touch.
Bill, looking back after, how many years were you in the Air Force?
Well, 4 years at the Air Force Academy, and then 36 years as a commissioned officer.
In your 40 years with the Air Force, what would you say was the highlight of your career?
It's hard to point out a single thing. I would say for an assignment, it was my last year as the commander of the Pacific Air Forces, where I had responsibility for 45,000 people, over 40 countries to interface with. That living in Hawaii, there's lots of reasons why that was a very special, really a chance to make an impact on the Air Force and on a lot of people's lives. That was probably the best assignment. But flying-wise, probably the most rewarding assignment I had was Vietnam, flying as a forward air controller, as a young 25-year-old making life and death decisions every day. Your aviator skills made you either survived or didn't survive based on what your skills were, and they were people depending on you for their lives. And so I think flying-wise, that had to be probably the most rewarding flying assignment I had.
How did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
First, war. War is a serious business. It's messy. It's ugly. It's intense. It's not something that anyone should take lightly, either for those that participate in it and what that's like, as well as for the nation and what the responsibilities are. For example, the 2003 invasion of Iraq. I was against it. I thought we were already involved in Afghanistan. I was worried about what we call phase 4, which is after you've won the battles, can you then exit and leave the place? And that we didn't have the resources that we needed to do it right, and it ended up with a very messy aftermath of almost a civil war that we had to fight. And so I was very concerned about that. A lot of us were, but Secretary Rumsfeld and others were the ones making decisions, and they thought that I think it would be really easy to do, and it's not. It never is. Once you invade it, you own it, and so that's tough. So war is a very tough business. I went through an era of post-Vietnam downsizing, lack of resources, and I remember very well in the late 70s during the Carter administration how resource poor we were, not ready to go to war, and how bad things were. And I think most of the guys in my generation that became senior officers were determined never to have a hollow force again. And I think you see today some of that, even though we are downsizing, the military leadership is trying with the remaining force to keep it combat ready and fully resourced. So those were very bad days, and we were not ready to go to war. I'll tell you one story that was told to me by a retired four-star by the name of Dutch Heiser. He retired in the mid-'80s, and he took over Military Airlift Command in 1980 or so, and it was in very, very bad shape. And he went into the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, who was a guy by the name of Lou Allen, and said, I've had command now for several months. I've been around to look at my command, and we are not combat ready, although we have been technically reporting combat ready. And when there are four, in those days, four graduations of combat ready. C1, you're ready to go to war. Everybody's trained. They got their equipment. They're ready to go. C2, you're lacking a few things, but you're still ready to go, and you can make do with what you got. C3 is you get some serious deficiencies. You may or may not be successful. And C4 is you are not ready to go to war. You don't have the equipment. You don't have the training. You don't have the resources to be successful. And his command, Military Airlift Command, had been reporting C1 and C2 for a while, and when he looked at it, they were not ready to go to war. And so he told the Chief of Staff, General Allen, he said, on Monday, I'm going to declare the entire command C4. And the Chief of Staff said, you can't do that, Dutch. You understand the political implications if you do that. It's classified, the rating is, but it's still the word gets out. He said it's going to create a huge firestorm. He said, I don't care. I need the resources, and you're not giving them to me. And until I get them, we're not going to say we're ready for combat if we're not. And they went back and forth, and at some point during this back and forth, General Heiser started undressing, took off his tie, took off his blouse, which had his medals and all that stuff, and laid it on a couch, and he started taking off his shirt. And General Allen said, what are you doing? Because they're arguing back and forth, and he said, you're either going to commit to give me the resources, or you're going to find another commander, and I'm not going to leave here with my uniform on. And they had been, of course, they had known each other for decades, and he said, Dutch, stop. I'll give you the resources that you need. Put your clothes back on. But that's what it took in those days to get the resources, because we were resource poor, and we were, in some cases, kidding ourselves that we were ready to go to war. So you may remember we had Desert One, which was trying to get the hostages out of Tehran, was unsuccessful. And then President Reagan came in, and we all of a sudden started getting resources. And that, for me, in my military career, those 5 or 6 years were watershed years in forming my opinion that if I ever got a chance to be a senior officer, I was going to make sure, to the extent that I could, that people who served with me and under me had the resources that they needed to be successful. Because some of them aren't going to come home, but it shouldn't be because they lack the equipment or the training.
Bill, speaking of the politics involved with the military, because you were in for so long and it's at all levels, from the lowest to the highest, how big a role did politics play in your military experience when you were in charge?
In terms of the national politics, very, very little. But politics are nothing more than trying to get what you need and working with people and finding a way to get what you need in order to get the job done. And so politics plays a very big part inside the military bureaucracy and chain of command as to know how to maneuver and how to figure out to get what you need, because it's very easy for people to say no. And so you have to get them to say yes on what you need. And so figuring that out and being nimble enough to do it without burning bridges, without creating a situation where you're either going to get yourself in trouble or somebody else in trouble, that's politics. And so I think the more successful people in the high ranks are very politically astute on how to get stuff done. I will say, in terms of the traditional way to think about politics, the military does not get involved in politics. And the civilian leadership of the military, from the president to Secretary of Defense, they very often don't understand that. And they don't appreciate how apolitical the military is. and we learn it at a very early age in our training and education as an officer, is we do not get involved in politics. You take an oath to the Constitution of the United States. You don't take an oath to the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or anybody else. You have an oath to the Constitution of the United States. And so we are apolitical. It's interesting when you go from a transition from one president to another, even if it's the same party, lots of new faces show up, and they don't quite trust senior officers because you're from the last administration. And it takes them a series of months to figure out that they can trust us. That this is for us, it doesn't matter. You obey the orders of the commander-in-chief as long as they're lawful and in keeping with the Constitution of the United States, and that's never been an issue. And so your loyalty very quickly changes from one administration to another, seamlessly, not an issue. The Congress is very sensitive to this. When you get promoted to high ranks, 3 and 4 star, they require you to sign a piece of paper that says when you go over and testify or you're asked a question before Congress and you are asked to give your personal opinion, you will give your personal opinion even if it is against the administration policy. Because, again, Congress is an independent arm. We are not part of the administration, and from a political standpoint, we are required to support the administration for the budget purposes and other things, but then when they ask our personal opinion, we have to give our personal opinion. And all of us are very much educated and steeped on how all that works, and it works very well in our system, probably better than any system in the world. I think as a result, the military as an institution is the most trusted institution in the United States, and every survey that they take shows that.
What words of advice would you give to the young people today who are entering the military?
Whether you're enlisted or an officer, the military is very much a meritocracy. And so you can be as successful as you can be given whatever God-given talents and effort you want to put into it. And so don't aspire to be a 4-star general. Aspire to be the best second lieutenant you can, and hopefully try to be the best captain that you can and best major that you can. And the rest of that will take care of itself. When I graduated from the Air Force Academy, I remember a conversation with my parents. And my parents, how long do you think you'll stay in? I said, I don't really know, but I think I can be really successful in the Air Force. And I said, I think I can be a general in the Air Force. And I didn't mean it as a bragging or anything. What I meant to say, and probably was not very articulate, was that it's the kind of organization that if you are talented enough, you'll be given a fair chance. That the politics that you sometimes find in business and other places doesn't really play such an important part in the Air Force. It is truly a meritocracy with a very well-defined path to get your career on track, and you know what it takes to be successful in your career. So when I was, for example, when I was a young pilot, I aspired to be an aircraft commander. It had nothing to do with rank or getting to be a rank. I wanted to be in the left seat flying that airplane because I thought I could. I saw a lot of aircraft commanders, and I thought, I'm as good as those guys. And after I got to be an aircraft commander, I wanted to be an instructor pilot. And then after I was an instructor pilot and I got a chance to see some squadron commanders, I'd say, one day, maybe in 5 or 6 years, 7 years, I can be a squadron commander. Got to be a squadron commander, and I thought to myself, I bet I could be a wing commander one day if I work real hard and got some great advice along the way. And that's sort of how it works. You don't start out aspiring to be a general officer, but you're in an institution that allows you to progress in your career as you learn and you get more education, more training, more wisdom, hopefully. You can raise in rank. And it's the same thing for enlisted people. You start out as an airman, and one day you may end up being a chief master sergeant. If you work really hard and you've got the skills that's required, you can be a chief master sergeant in the Air Force.
Bill, the military culture is so different than the real world culture. You were so long in the military. what did you see as the biggest difference when you retired from the military and had to function in the real world?
You know, I think that's in some ways a little bit deceptive, because you live in the real world when you're in the military. Now, when I was a young officer, most officers lived in base housing, and you were very much more of a closed community than you are today. Nowadays, there's not so much base housing. Most officers live off base. You live in the community. You go to the local churches. Your kids attend the local schools. You're part of the local community. Now, you move every 2 or 3 years, and so you become a bit of a gypsy, but you live in the real world. And so the transition was really pretty easy. Now, I will say, as a senior officer, I had no trouble in the transition once I started working for Pratt & Whitney. When I went back home for the 6 months, I played golf with my high school friends and spent a lot of time with family because I hadn't been around for decades. And I loved that. When I went to work for Pratt & Whitney, I made new friends. I went to work every day. We played golf on the weekends. We did things. It was more of a transition for my wife. Because when you move around in the military, especially as a senior officer, you're going from base to base, post to post, and the wives is very much its own culture. And you make instant friends, and when you welcome a newcomer, and you immediately have a social network and stuff. When we moved here to Connecticut, my wife had none of that. It was her first time outside the Air Force, and so you either got to join a quilting group or a church, but there's nobody there with open arms to welcome you and to build a social network. So in some ways, the transition was a little tougher for my wife than it was for me.
Interesting. How would you say your service to our country affected your life?
Oh, I had a wonderful life in the military. I loved the service. I liked doing something that was bigger than myself, to feel like I was contributing something, that I was making a difference in people's lives, especially. You know, the military, when you're a commander, you really are responsible for your people. When I was the PACAF commander, I had 22 deaths in PACAF between drownings and car accidents and motorcycle accidents and airplane accidents and all that. And I took all of those very personally. So you get a closeness in the military and a sense of responsibility that I think you don't get in a lot of other career fields. And so that part of my life I loved. I loved the Air Force. It's certainly going to the Air Force Academy and having a chance to serve really made me whatever person I am today. It shaped me in I think very positive ways, and we will have been married 44 years in August, and we've loved our military life. We talk about it all the time, about what fun it was, how we moved around the country, around the world, and had experiences that when I go back and I talk to my high school friends that have really never moved from Maine, they go on vacations and do all of that, but they just, I feel so blessed to have the experiences that I did, to live in Germany and to live in Hawaii and to travel every place. All over the 50 United States. I've been to every state. We've lived in a lot of different states. It's just been a wonderful, enriching, wonderful life.
Bill, is there anything that you would like to add to this interview that we haven't covered?
No, Eileen, I think it's been pretty comprehensive, going from the beginnings to the end. It's I think we've pretty well covered most of it.
Well, I'd like to thank you for your extensive service to our country.
Thanks.